Law number 7, the law of resistance. Where you feel resistance, do research. Very related to law number 6 about inclusion and how you manage difference. But resistance, that's something we say a lot, but let's give a little bit more context than we might normally offer. But resistance, what do we mean by resistance? What are examples of it? How would people locate themselves in that experience?
Well, the first thing is resistance is information. And what information it is and how you use it is what's important in this law. There's all kinds of times where we have an intention and we have experienced when people receive it and accept it and are on side for it and are a member of the Confederacy of Accomplishments. Those are thrilling, exciting moments where we're experiencing reception, not resistance. In contrast, we all know all the times where there's something that we feel is absolutely right. We've done the research, we've cared about this, we're committed to it, and yet it's hard that there are people or their response is, yeah, but, or they say yes to things and they end up not doing them. So there's all sorts of different expressions of resistance. But for me, it's wherever I'm confronting a slowdown or an impediment to something that I feel is just and right and well thought of, what do I do in that moment? Because that's the moment of resistance.
And sometimes the resistance is with me, where somebody says something and I feel resistance. And so sometimes the research I have to do is, well, what has me resist in this moment? When we talked about emotional agility and bioreaction, sometimes it's because there's something that's really important to me that I haven't yet articulated or put my finger on, that this particular idea or solution or conversation feels in conflict for me. And so I think there's the research external, and then there's also the well, wait a minute, how what's actually happening over here that has me feel a particular way?
I think for this to be a practically useful law, we want to say, well, what exactly are you going to do if you are the researcher? And so I want to take us back to, in our opening law, the law of teamwork, we talked about the intersection. And we say that there are axioms of the intersection. And by that we mean they are true, they're axiomatic. They are just so. And we say that the first axiom is that all human beings have purposes, concerns, and circumstances, which if you've listened to the previous laws, you've heard us use that triad multiple times. So we have things that we're for, which is our purposes, things we're worried about that we're against, which is our concerns, and situations we are in or have been in the circumstances of our life. So when I'm resisting something like you're saying, it's a time to stop and take a breath and look at, wait a minute. For me, what's most important now, which is a purpose kind of question. For me, what concern, worry do I have? For me, what circumstance keeps me from fully embracing this? It's the same research you do with other people. So if somebody's resisting me, it's time for me to stop and take a breath and refresh my understanding of, relative to this thing that I'm caring about, what are their purposes? What are their concerns? What are their circumstances? So if you simplify the research, it's easier to be a researcher. And we find that if you just discover those 3 things relative to this, what are they for? What are they against? What are they in? Almost all the time, that reveals some things. What's the quote that was on the holiday card this year is about, there was a conversation
that only the people in this room can have.
That only the people in this room can have. Find that conversation. From who? Murray Brown?
Adrian Murray Brown.
Murray Brown. And where there's resistance, if you do that research of the different participants in the potential conversation, it reveals what's the conversation only these people can have relative to this. So research is an act of discovery, treating resistance like important information I've yet to understand.
Mm-hmm. And what I found to be really interesting is that in doing that research, some of the time we actually are in raging agreement and we just have miscommunicated something. Mickey, I don't know if you'll remember this. Years ago, you and I were in a room, I don't know, it's 175 leaders in a room, and we had them partner with people next to them to talk about something that was important to them, and then their partner had to say back to them, here's what I think matters to you about that topic. And somebody who had a lot of power in the room came up to me afterwards and said, well, that was so fascinating. And I said, really, why? And he said, because my partner got it totally wrong about what mattered to me. And I sort of took a gulp because I thought, I wonder how this, and I said, so what did you take from that? And I sort of expected him to say, like, she wasn't listening. What he said was, the way I'm talking about this issue is not conveying to people what actually matters to me, which is why I'm not actually getting what I need from the teams. But I don't think we often get that data. So like we get the resistance, we just want to keep pushing our agenda, pushing what we're trying to have. And what he realized was he'd been communicating about this particular thing for a while. But when she reported back, well, here's why I think that matters, he said she was so far off and he realized, oh, I've been missing whole parts of the story that are really necessary for people to understand it. So sometimes that resistance actually just reveals things that I've forgotten to say, or I have assumed in the conversation that we were already aligned on and on the same page, or maybe that we actually are totally in raging agreement and we've just been using different words to describe something.
I think there's two things to say about that. So one, I mean, this engagement with resistance in a different way is very similar to what we talked about in the law of presence, of becoming the observer of what's happening, so that, and it really is a major foundational underpinning of emotional agility just in general, is can I observe what's happening and see all of the emotions or the things that are happening as information. There's something to learn from that thing that's happening. And this switch is the gap from below 50 to above 50. So, and it's one of the most challenging to get used to navigating. It's that flip from bioreaction to can I come to a more purposeful or accurate place? And a huge aspect of accuracy, we talk about separating facts from explanations. So explanation, whether it's the story I have that I wish people were understanding that they're clearly not hearing, or the story people are using to explain what is happening because they don't have another answer. They don't have something that we've come to an alignment on of what that thing means. So explanation. I think this trips people up a lot of the time, but it's really, really powerful when you do get the distinction. So what would we offer in terms of explanation and how that changes your relationship to resistance?
Well, there's going to be a lot to go after in this right here. And my first response is that if you go to there's three axioms. The first is everybody has purposes, concerns, and circumstances. The second is if I perceive you as somebody who doesn't understand or respect my purposes, concerns, or circumstances, I will resist you. The perceived thing's important. That means my way of explaining just happened is you're dangerous to me. So I'm in an explanation that has me resist. You know, that this thing I care about seems in jeopardy, or this thing that I'm afraid of doesn't matter to you, this circumstance I'm in you don't understand or respect. So there is an explanation I'm now in that's going to keep me from engaging with you, that I want to avoid, resist, stop engaging with you. So the first thing to get about the power of explanation is we are explanatory beings.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the speed of an opinion? We often ask people. Like, how quickly do people decide like, don't like, agree, disagree, enjoy, don't like? We are the fastest storytellers known in the history of anything. So we come up with an explanation really fast. To examine the explanation rather than just have the explanation, that's an incredible asset in high-performance collaboration. Like if I notice I'm resisting you, well, what's the explanation that I have for you? Well, all you care about is this, or your whatever it is. So first of all, being able to separate my explanation from what just happened. That's the first moment. You know, we talk about this as conversational hygiene. You want the conversation to be impactful? My explanation is you're dangerous to me. Okay, what just happened? So now I need to separate the facts of the matter. You came in the room, you asked this question, I gave this answer, you gave me your answer, and now I wish you weren't in the room. Okay. So we have to separate the facts of the matter from the story I'm telling about that. So that's the first move if we're going to have explanation become an asset rather than a liability. There's other moves.
Well, and I think this separation of the two is actually way harder than the just describing it sounds, because the story that we've told actually lives so loud for us. Years ago, I had a COO of an $8 billion company that I was coaching, so very large organization, very highly regarded leader. There was a team meeting, and he was not invited. His explanation immediately was, this team doesn't want my point of view in this conversation. And like, he was on a tirade in a coaching call about why they were excluding him and why they didn't want him included and what they were trying to work on that he really felt like he needed. The executive assistant who set up the meeting clicked the wrong name on the invitation and invited the wrong person instead of him.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, but the speed at which he had a story about why that team was not including him on this very important decision that needed to be made was incredible. And people make mistakes. Things happen that are not nearly as nefarious as we make them out to be. Yeah. I always say that the stories we tell are rarely as generous. We're rarely generous about our stories. Usually the story we tell is something much worse than what's actually happening around us.
And that is an act of our defensive side of our being. Like, it's all from this place of protection that those things happen so quickly. It's just that the becoming more enlightened beings capable of choosing our destiny it takes a little bit more effort.
Well, that moment is also the occasion for research. And it takes extraordinary self-awareness and emotional agility. So when I have an explanation that lives for me, that factually, yes, they don't want me in here because of this. That's God's whispering in my ear and told me that's what's going on. Can I catch my uninformed certainty? Mm-hmm. I have decided what is so. Mm-hmm. Take a breath and just go to the person hosting the meeting. I just noticed that I'm not on the invitation. Can you explain to me what has that be true? And
the way in which you do that changes the conversation.
Oh, yeah. Is the mood research?
Yes.
Right. Or is the mood veiled accusation?
Well, and I think
that's
interrogation. Interrogation. I think that's a great example of that. The reason why explanations are so powerful in going to work at getting great at this is because explanations change what we do. So it changes how we behave, how we engage with other people, what we think is possible, where we see limitations in our relationships or in our work together. And so in that case, we have to catch ourselves in what is the mood with which I go ask that question? Because does that mean that person really does have an opportunity to go, oh, I thought you were on the invitation. I had no idea. Or do they immediately feel attacked? And then their response might be, I did include you on the invitation. What are you talking about? Or whatever. It changes what that engagement is with that person and might either influence in a positive way or damage more than you realize outside of that.
Talking about how explanation can limit or expand what people see and what's possible, it brings me back to the role of mood in that happening. Because leadership responsible for mood, that's really valuable leadership. And if I'm the leader of that team, for instance, and we're exploring resistance and what are people feeling and thinking and saying. So let's say you do something that I don't like or I wish wouldn't happen. If I'm really going to be in the mood of research, I go into that curious and even, unbiased, out to discover, not prove. So is my mood really curious? Or is my mood suspicious? Or is my mood accusatory? So I think that's an important thing, that if we really want to explore what's happening for another, we don't want our mood to actually impact our ability to discover or their desire to speak.
Well, because sometimes that mood has me be below 50 on the conversation meter, back to that, where really, yeah, I'm asking questions, but the mood is trying to defend something or prove something, as opposed to I'm actually trying to learn. Because even curiosity, I find sometimes people try to weaponize the curiosity in a way, right? Because they're coming at it from almost an interrogation standpoint. That's why I said this earlier, about feeling interrogated on the other side of it, as opposed to what's the curiosity given the purpose that we're in together, given the thing that we're trying to do? What am I really trying and actively interested in learning about?
Well, and I think a really great example is like detectives on a case or something. And I know you've had this experience actually working with law enforcement, but the confirmation bias issue is just so limiting and has huge repercussions. If all you're looking for is evidence of what you already believe is true, how does that change the course of events?
Yeah, Richard has said, Reinishek, from his history in law enforcement, said one of the biggest problems for detectives is deciding immediately up front who they think did it. And then everything's organized around proving that. So I think interrogation, and the way you're talking about that spirit, that's not authentic curiosity. That's this dominating attempt to get something to go the direction I want it to go or to verify what I already think. So this spirit of research brings with it an exploration of how available am I to entertain alternate explanations for the same situation. Like the story that you told about the guy not being invited and making up all of these terrible reasons why he was excluded, and you find out it was an accident in the moment of sending out invitations. That in that moment, can we actually entertain? There may be all kinds of reasons that what just happened, and I don't know what they are. So I'm going to go discover that. And to be available to multiple explanations, I think is really powerful. And that's why I love, sometimes we've had people take a set of facts and do 5 different explanations about what that possibly means. Mm-hmm. And that kind of explanatory agility is really powerful in helping a team move through times of difficulty or resistance and emerging into new possibilities. An interview that I saw years ago, I was really touched by, was with Richard Feynman, who was a theoretical physicist, won the Nobel Prize, I think 65. He's one of the quantum physics leaders at that time, and I think the Nobel Prize was in the field of quantum dynamics. Well, he was lauded, brilliant, also controversial in many ways. Right now, I'm just talking about his brilliance. And when he got to be so famous, the competition for graduate students to work on his projects was huge. So he said in this interview, one of the things he developed as a question that he asked anybody, if they got to him, they already had proven intellectually that they were, a brilliant student and they'd gotten through all the degrees and, they understood all kinds of things most people don't about theoretical physics. Once they got past all that, that's when they got to him. And he would ask him this question. So Emma Rose will act like you are the person being interviewed and I'm Dr. Feynman. Emma Rose, can you tell me, why did you wear what you have on today?
Because it has a lapel for a mic and we were recording.
Okay, good. Can you tell me another reason, why did you wear what you wore today?
Because I like it.
Okay. And can you give me another reason, why did you wear what you wore today?
Because it was clean.
Okay. You would be passing Dr. Feynman's test. Because he said who he eliminated was somebody that said, well, I already answered that. They only had one explanation for what they wore. He said, if you don't have the explanatory agility to be able to look at things from a variety of different perspectives, if you're stuck with your first explanation, you cannot be a theoretical physicist. And so he just decided they were not going to join the project. So I thought that was really interesting. Can we free our minds to be able to consider multiple explanations for the same set of events and rank them in terms of the value they create or the waste they create.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, oh, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think one of the reasons why this is so powerful and so important inside the law of resistance is so often resistance happens because we get stuck with our first explanation.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't understand me, so I must need to explain this over and over and over.
And I'm going to
again.
double down
And
on
I'm
whatever
going to double down on it. Or you are resisting it, so you must have something against me and my agenda.
Right.
You must be trying to explain, right? Like we get so stuck in whatever the first thing is that comes into our mind. Now, some of that's based on past history or past experience. And I'm not saying that we want to ignore anything that's happened to us in the past. But as we said in the law of presence, can we actually be in this moment to see, okay, that's, anybody who's hung out with me for more than a minute knows that I like to say, that's an explanation.
Right.
Right, so we often have an explanation. Can you find another one? But by the way, anybody who wants to practice this, here's a really easy one that may lower frustration while you're driving, because most of us, if somebody cuts us off in traffic, immediately is like, oh, that guy's a jerk, that gal's a jerk. Can we come up with like, what are all the possible explanations for why they might have done that? In a hurry to get to the hospital for the birth of a child, late to their wedding. Right. So,
right. Well, and I think there is something in that too that I find is a challenge sometimes for people to get over in this switch in mindset in coaching is but my explanation seems way more plausible. So why wouldn't I just believe that thing? Because I have historical evidence. I have blah, 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 blah. And I do think that this thing about, it's not that your explanation is invalid. There might be something really honorable or something that's really true for you about why you have that story about that thing. But can you recognize it as one data point and then see what else is possible and what new action that might have you take? So me coming up with the story that, oh, well, they're just hurrying to get to the hospital because she's about to pop. And that would be a horrible experience. I would be trying to get my way through traffic too. I would be cutting me off. That has me react differently in the moment, instead of just being in a shitty mood the rest of the time that I'm driving and coming up with some story that they're an asshole. Okay, and so now the world is horrible and everything's burning, instead of they're just trying to get to the hospital. So even if it's not true, it still has me have a different experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. Because the question is, particularly when we're talking about high performance collaboration, what purpose does that explanation serve?
Mm-hmm.
Does it give us something new to work on together? I often quote our dear friend Michael Moon, who I walked up to him one time. Michael was a head wrangler at a ranch where we do 8-month immersion program. And I walked up to him one day kvetching about something. And he said to me, Robin, that may be true. It's just not particularly helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true about
Yeah.
a lot of those explanations that we get stuck with, is like, that may be my experience, that may be valid, but if it doesn't give us the next thing to work on.
Mm-hmm.
And I find when we're talking about collaboration on teams, sometimes that resistance is inside the team. Sometimes it's resistance for that team inside the system, whether that's with the sponsor or with another group that they need to work with. And so often they just double down on their explanation of like, well, we just need to convince them, as
Right.
opposed, or the sponsor has lost faith in us, or whatever their explanation is. Okay, so that might be true, but it's not particularly helpful in terms of giving you a new action to take. So when we talk about doing research inside when you meet resistance, it really is to find a new action, not just to prove that they're an asshole,
Right.
or to prove that this effort's never going to work. It's to see, okay, might there be a different approach that we haven't considered yet?
Right. I think one of the really common ones we get with clients is well, we're understaffed, or we're always under-resourced. We don't have access to That might be true. And if all you do is stick to that story, you're disempowering your ability to do anything about the situation.
That's right.
I also think this is a good opportunity to just bring back up the word sincerity and what we actually mean by it, because sincerity can sound like a really good word, and you might be being sincere about a thing, but what we often say about sincerity is that it's thoughtless certainty that your perspective is the right one, or that your opinion, your view is reality. And so it's just that switch to that what I think might not be the only truth. There might be something else to see and to learn. And so how can we start occupying that openness of a mindset? Two practical things that I think that we could offer in terms of application. One is, I love what you said earlier about noticing resistance in yourself. I think it's a great way to start studying, how does it show up? How do I have compassion for myself that it's showing up, and start observing it as data? And then how does that have me see other people's behavior as there's more explanations available than just that they're against me or whatever that is. So doing a resistance audit is something that I've encouraged people to do in coaching. I've found it really helpful just for personal development too. The noticing of myself, like, oh, that's what me feeling resistant looks like or feels like. I'm resisting that person. Oh, I'm in my head explaining why they're wrong and I'm right, or whatever the thing is. It just has you get really good at catching it. The other is getting in the practice with a team of, instead of opposing a thing or I don't like that idea, well, this is what I appreciate about that, but this is what I would propose, and this is what I would propose. Anything else that you would offer about that practice for a team to start getting good at this?
Well, to get back into where you were looking in the self as well as others could be resistance. Something, again, I'd like to see in the show notes for this particular law is the conversation prep chart.
Yep.
So we use this chart for preparing for a conversation. It's particularly important where you know there's resistance among the people, when there's not this unforced collaboration, but there's actually some kind of tension that's unresolved. And as you know, the first line is researching yourself, because we can start out with a sincere worry like, this thing's never going to work, or this is too hard, or these people don't care. All right, well, let's reset myself. I'm going to research, what am I for? What am I against? What am I in as purposes, concerns, and circumstances? So you just reminded me of that, is that often we want to center ourselves to then be able to be open to different explanations about who they are and what's important to them, and to actually be a researcher. Often I find if we stop and take a breath and research ourselves, it calms us in a way that you're more available to research other people. So I love that, because what inspired that for me in this moment is you saying there's some practical things that we can do.
I think the other, and you started to say this, I think in a lot of places where there's resistance, we have put an or where we could put an and. We can have quality or safety. We can have speed or customer satisfaction. We can have quality or resources, right? Okay, well, what if you said there has to be an and in that in that sentence? Well, we need to have speed and safety. What would that take? What are your concerns about speed and safety? And so it just frees us from some of the constraints, because I think some of that resistance comes from places where we've made assumptions about what has to be true and not given ourselves the opportunity to see alternatives, and forcing an and into a conversation where we might have put a but or an or before actually causes us to have to get slightly more creative than we might have been. And I also think just challenging, and Mickey, maybe you'll say this, around, if I'm stuck with an explanation, am I promising that that's always going to be true? Will you say?
Well, one of the things I've done with people in the past who are stuck with an explanation that actually is interfering with their own progress, like, these people will never cooperate. And I'll say, could there be any other explanation? No, I'm clear that that's it. I said, all right. That means you are accepting this as though it's true. Yeah. So, okay, here's what I ask that you do. I ask you to say that back to me again, that thing you're certain about. Just put "I promise" in front of it. And they'll look at me and go, what? Just go ahead and try it. I promise they will never be open and they'll never cooperate. They say, why would I say a thing like that? Well, if you're not open to any other explanation, you are committed to that. So just own it, so that you can be a source of a lack of cooperation. And usually that just breaks something up, causes new conversations. I think this thing about "and," it sounds simple, but that's a really beautiful thing to bring into this. Because often the way you turn resistance into inquiry is asking a question that nobody's been asking. And to say, how do we have safety and speed? It just shifts the mind. People suddenly start seeing things they weren't seeing or open to things they weren't open to. So that's still in that spirit of research, because the way you asked that was that even-handed, actually curious, I wonder.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and I think, like, let's use this just one more second on the speed and the safety. If I don't put an and in there, and I care about safety, and I believe you care about speed, my assumption the whole time is that you don't care about safety. Right? So my resistance is because I believe that you don't care about this thing. When you put the and in there, I can see like, no, there's care for both. Okay, it frees me to actually be less resistant to what you might have to offer.
Right.
One last thing on resistance, because I'm pretty sure we're going to wind this one to a close, is I think we also have to look at how am I behaving that might have other people be resisting me? So what's my contribution to the resistance? If I resist you, we are just hardwired. You are going to resist me in return.
Right.
And I think I don't know how to I don't know that it's all that valuable to say, well, you started it. Somebody has to stop it. Somebody has to be the one that's willing to say, like, okay, there's something in here that's actually causing us to resist each other when we actually are committed to this common future that we've been talking about.
Right.
What are we going to do to unravel that? And because I think otherwise it just winds itself tighter and tighter and tighter of this resistance spiral.
Right.
That's another point about the place of power in all this. Because somebody with position power who's aggressive or dominant about wanting people to agree with them creates resistance. You know that thing we've done for 30 years, if you put your hand up, and I press, how fast does Robin resist? You know, it's just, and so here I'm coming in with the dominating move, and so even if somebody doesn't have position power, emotionally, intellectually, they're resisting me. So how am I causing resistance? That's a great closing question to ask people to delve into.
Right. Well, and if you do have an explanation like somebody's against you, all we're saying is go research it and make sure that it's true instead of continuing to act from it. This has been The Law of Resistance, and next we'll be talking about the law of learning.